Okay, be honest, did you click on this video in order to get a little bit more information about cross-examination? Because if you did, if I'm describing you, you've come to the wrong video. Because in this video, we're gonna be covering so much material all related to cross-examination. I mean, just take a look at the timestamp below. This is one of my longer videos. We're gonna be covering so much. So in order to get ready, you need to strap in because this video is about to blow your mind. More specifically, in this video that you're watching right now, I plan on sharing with you one of the lessons out of Trial Ad Academy that covers the fundamentals involving cross-examination. And for those that don't know, Trial Ad Academy is my online course devoted to giving you the skills necessary to go conquer the courtroom. It's a lot like these YouTube videos, but on steroids, because in Trial Ad Academy, we do a deep dive into every step, every stage of the jury trial process. That way you can develop your game plan and implement that game plan on game day. It's free updates, lifetime access for those that are enrolled, and you can take it at your own pace. If you need more information about this, if you're interested, be sure to hit the link down in the description below. With all that said, let's start talking about cross-examination. I have to admit that I am super excited for this lesson because it is all about cross-examination, the sexiest part of a jury trial. And in this lesson, we're gonna be covering the 12 fundamental truths that apply to all cross-examinations. That way you can take your cross to the next level. Before we dive into this lesson, I do wanna give you a little bit of a heads up. The numbers that are applied to each one of these principles are basically strategic to where it allows the lesson to flow more smoothly. In other words, the 1 through 12 isn't a ranking system. So if you're watching maybe the first 5 and you think the next 7 aren't gonna really be as important as the first 5, that's not the case. In reality, some of the most important aspects are gonna be on the back end of this lesson because there's gonna be continuous flow as we talk about and touch on certain subject matter. All that to say, be sure to watch this lesson in its entirety. That way you can soak up all the information and that way you can see all the valuable aspects that go into a killer cross-examination. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in by talking about the first principle. And this is the question you should be asking every single time to yourself, which is, should you cross-examine the witness or should you not cross-examine the witness? I know this idea that you don't have to cross-examine every single witness that the opposing side puts on the stand may blow your mind a little bit, but there are 3 things you need to consider whenever you're asking this question to yourself. First, if the witness ends up testifying and that testimony really doesn't hurt your client's case, and you know cross-examination doesn't help your client's case, then there may be no need to actually cross-examine that witness. And you may be thinking, when would this ever happen? Well, there may be a situation where opposing counsel just calls a witness in order to prove up a very basic fact, and that way the record is a bit more clean, or maybe opposing counsel is trying to satisfy an element, and that element, again, is super basic, super easy, and probably should have been satisfied with some sort of stipulation or agreement, but let's just say opposing counsel never got around to getting that stipulation. So instead they just put a witness up who ends up saying that the day was whatever, and that satisfies the element of proving the date. Anything like that is super basic and really doesn't require you to pull out the full arsenal to beat up the witness on cross-examination. And this gets me to a very important point. You see, my goal here is after you watch this lesson on the fundamentals involving cross-examination, and after you complete this entire chapter involving cross-examination, and after you finish Trial Ad Academy, you're gonna be super gung-ho when it comes to your trial skills. But what I don't want you to do is to be overzealous and have a hair trigger to where you're wanting to cross-examine every single witness, no matter the witness that's put on the stand. If you do that, you run a very serious risk of making the jury turn on you. The last thing the jury wants to see is a skilled lawyer beat up a witness on cross-examination when it's absolutely unnecessary. So again, this gets to the fundamental fact that you need to ask yourself, do I really need to cross this person? And if that witness was simply put on the stand to prove a simple element, then the answer is probably no. Now let's move on to the second consideration. Let's say you determine that there is going to be some benefit for your client to cross-examine the witness. At the same time, you're gonna have to do a bit of a calculation on the fly. If the benefit is substantially outweighed by any risk that may be harmful to your client, then again, you may not want to cross-examine that person. For example, let's say the witness on the stand is a 9-year-old girl who's an absolute wreck on the stand. She's nervous, she's scared, she's sad for whatever reason, she's bawling, she's having a hard time testifying, and then after direct, it gets passed to you, and you have to determine, okay, the benefits of this cross-examination, is it gonna be substantially outweighed by the risk of me potentially having the jury turn on me if I cross-examine this little girl? That's some math you're gonna have to do, like I said, on the fly, because the last thing you wanna do is come in guns blazing on a little girl. At the same time, if you try and maybe be soft about it to where you're asking more open-ended questions or you have a very friendly tone, the risk you run is potentially having the jury turn on you because it may seem like you're manipulating the answers from that little girl. Again, this is gonna be case specific and you're gonna have to use your judgment, but this is something you definitely need to consider. And if you do decide that you are not going to cross-examine the witness, then all you need to do is stand up and tell the court, Your Honor, there's no need for me to cross-examine this witness, and then sit back down. Whenever you say something along these lines, it kind of also tells the jury that you think there really isn't a need for you to cross-examine the witness, instead of you standing up and saying, no cross-examination, Your Honor, to where the jury may think, oh, okay, is he not cross-examining the witness because he doesn't have any questions for the witness because their case isn't as strong as he was saying earlier? You don't want those thoughts. So by having kind of a short explanation like, Your Honor, there's just no need for me to cross-examine this witness, it plants the seed in the jury's mind like, okay, there's just really is no need to cross-examine the witness. I know this little portion was a bit of an overkill, but this is a little bit of a game of theater that you're having to play throughout your cross-examination especially. But let's say you do decide to cross-examine the witness. Your job is to always, I don't know if I can emphasize this more, is to let the witness make themselves look bad through their own answers and for you not to embarrass and humiliate the witness. If you do that, again, you run the risk of the jury turning on you because the jury recognizes you're a trained lawyer, you went to law school, you took trial ad academy, and this witness is out of their element and it's just not fair. If you decide to make the witness look bad, that's not going to play well to the jury. Instead, ask questions and let the answers look bad in front of the jury. And that way, that'll ultimately make the witness look less credible, look bad on the stand, whatever you're trying to do and accomplish during cross-examination, let the answers do it. Okay, this is an important distinction that needs to be made, but I think that was clear. If it wasn't, replay it and then play it back through and then emphasize, maybe slow-mo the always do this part. The second principle when it comes to cross-examination is that you need to internally accept that there is a distinction between getting a witness to admit something and you proving something. If your goal for every cross-examination is to get the witness to admit what you're trying to make the witness admit, you are going to be very frustrated with all your cross-examinations. So here's the distinction. If you try and get the witness to admit to a fact, it's going to really throw a wrench into your cross-examination, to where your cross-examination isn't going to be nearly as effective as you would want it to be. The reason for this, if you try and get the witness to admit to a simple fact like, today's Saturday, you run the risk of the witness saying, well, I mean, it's the day after Friday, and in doing so, yeah, the witness is gonna make themselves look bad, but again, you're gonna maybe get bogged down on, so it's Saturday, and the witness is gonna say, no, it's the day before Sunday, and then you go back and forth, and it just looks like just absolutely petty. On the other hand, the distinction there is instead of trying to get the witness to admit to the fact that it's Saturday, you can simply go through certain logic to where the math adds up and you prove that fact to the jury, which is all you really need to do in a trial case because the jury is the one that ends up ruling on the entire case. So if you can prove 1 + 1 + 1 through your series of questions, and then if you want the witness to admit to this particular fact, the answer is 3, just don't ask that question. Just let the jury know exactly what the answer is by proving it. Again, the distinction, Don't try and get the witness to admit it, just prove it to the jury through your cross-examination, and the jury will take care of the rest. Principle number 3 is that you're gonna have to choose one of 3 strategies when it comes to cross-examination. The first strategy is to use the other side's witness to help build your client's case and to help solidify your client's argument. And if you can also incorporate your client's theme, then that'll take your cross to the next level. And if you can ultimately prove certain aspects of your client's case through cross-examination by using the other side's witnesses, that's going to be extremely powerful during closing argument, because you can essentially say that these issues are uncontested. The other side's witnesses proved these issues. And that is going to absolutely be very compelling to the jury. The second strategy is basically the one you see on TV, which is essentially using your cross-examination to nuke the entire testimony of the witness. In other words, you're trying to discredit the witness completely. And when it comes to nuking the entire testimony of the witness, I'm just going to tease this strategy because in future lessons, we're gonna be going into much greater detail. We'll basically go through every single way to impeach and to discredit the witness. If I were to talk about them all right now, this lesson in this video would be extremely long, and that is not what you want to watch when you are watching a lesson. We need to take this in bite-sized chunks, and in this lesson, we're sticking to the fundamentals. But here's my warning. If you ultimately decide that you're going to nuke the entire testimony of the other side's witness, in other words, you're going to discredit the witness altogether. Maybe the witness is a liar, maybe the witness is incredibly biased, then you need to be very calculated and strategic in doing so, because if you end up nuking the testimony, there is no going back. And this takes me to the third strategy. The third strategy is what I'm calling the hybrid approach. And the reason why the hybrid approach exists is because the nuking strategy can be a bit dangerous. The reason for that is if you decide to nuke the entire witness's testimony and to discredit the witness, the risk you run there is you're also not going to be able to apply the first strategy. In other words, you're not going to also be able to prove or help prove your client's elements or your client's case, or to help strengthen your client's argument. The reason for that is if you, on one hand, are saying, look, this witness's testimony shouldn't be believed at all, the witness isn't credible, yada, yada, yada. But at the same time, the witness did say this and did say that, which was favorable to my client, so you should believe that. You see how that's a little bit of a conflict right there, and it's not going to be very compelling to the jury. So with the hybrid approach, you get the best of both worlds, but I'll be the first to admit it's pretty hard to pull off. The reason for that is you're going to have to segment your cross-examination. In doing so, that means the first part of your cross-examination needs to involve questions that help prove up your client's case. In other words, implement strategy number 1. The reason why you need to start this way is because if you drop the nuke first, the risk you run is maybe discrediting the entire witness's testimony from that point on. You want to hold back on dropping the bomb until the very end, and your goal is to segment the portion that you're attempting to discredit to where you're not discrediting the entire testimony, but just certain aspects of what the witness was maybe testifying on direct, or what is biasing the witness, or any other potentially discrediting factors. So if you can successfully partition the nuking effect, so to speak, then the goal is to go during closing argument and argue in front of the jury all the facts that ultimately benefit your client through the witness's testimony, and then to discredit that little segment that you partition during the nuking effect or the nuking strategy. But just be careful during closing argument not to be overzealous and to try and say something like the witness shouldn't be believed. Instead, you want to be strategic during your closing and make it very clear what portion should not be believed and the reason why the other portion that is beneficial to your client should be believed. Number 4 shouldn't come as a surprise, which is that during cross-examination, all your questions need to be leading questions. But there are a few exceptions to this rule. As an initial matter, if you don't know what a leading question is, I'll go ahead and link you to a video where I explain exactly what leading questions are and how you can ultimately craft your leading question for your cross-examination. But to save you time, I'm not going to get into that in this particular lesson, just in case you've already watched that. I want to keep this lesson as short and as tight as possible, and that way I'm not wasting anybody's time. But I did promise you exceptions to this rule, and because this is a foundational video, I'm going to give you some of the foundational exceptions, some of your basic exceptions. When it comes to the advanced exceptions, and I've said exceptions a whole lot right now, I'm gonna put those in my back pocket because in future lessons, we're gonna talk about more advanced techniques that you can use during cross-examination, and that's when you'll see those advanced exceptions. Exception number one, and I hate to say it, but there are gonna be times where you're not truly prepared for your cross-examination of this particular witness. Doesn't mean that you're not prepared for other witnesses, but maybe this witness was a surprise witness and you weren't expecting this witness to testify and you didn't really get much during direct examination. In that situation, the best way to get ammunition is sometimes by asking an open-ended question and then going from there. Maybe through this open-ended question, the witness is going to kind of spotlight where you need to take this cross-examination, and at that point, you can start asking leading questions. The second exception is actually pretty fun. There are gonna be times where the witness thinks they're the smartest person in the courtroom and they want everyone to know it, and that ends up coming off very abrasively to the jury, and the jury just simply doesn't like the witness, and it's obvious to everyone except for the witness. If the witness is their own worst enemy, then sometimes you can add some gasoline to that fire by asking an open-ended question. In doing so, you just let the witness talk, and the witness is gonna keep shoveling themselves into a deeper and deeper hole. Exception number three is a matter of confidence and skills. There are times during your cross-examination where you've just absolutely pinned the witness down, and you know no matter the answer, it is not going to be beneficial for the witness, and you were able to prove what you wanted to prove to the jury. In that event, if the witness just simply can't go anywhere, you may want to ask an open-ended question if you just absolutely know without a doubt the witness is just going to make themselves look bad. Remember, you're not trying to make the witness look bad. You want the witness's testimony to make themselves look bad. If you've been able to accomplish that degree of pinning the witness down, then it may be worth asking an open-ended question to where you can further solidify the fact that the jury should not like and trust the witness's testimony. Principle number 5 is you need to be strategic in how you start your cross-examination. One way to start your cross-examination is to come out with hard-hitting questions, guns blazing, and that way you capture the jury's attention and they know this cross-examination is worth listening to. But I also think there may be an approach that will be better in certain situations to where you're not having to come out guns blazing. And I know this may be controversial to where people may disagree with this, but I think there are going to be times where it's appropriate to not come in guns blazing, but instead kind of take a softer approach to where you build up to a certain point. The reason for this is that it really circles back to the 3 strategies involving cross-examination. If you're trying to come in guns blazing, that means you're probably trying to nuke the entire testimony. That makes sense. But if you're trying to elicit testimony, answers, and responses that ultimately help prove your client's case, then you may want to hide the ball a little bit to where the witness doesn't know what you're trying to get at. And here's a very effective strategy. Okay, so this is an exciting part of Trial Ad Academy, when things come together. And I want you to think back to the jury selection chapter, more specifically the lesson involving analogous questions, analogous facts. The reason for that is I want you to implement those analogous questions in your cross-examination. Now, if you have no idea what I'm talking about when it comes to analogous questions, that means you either missed the entire jury selection chapter, or you skipped over it, or you simply forgot. If you don't know what I'm talking about and you need a refresher, go open up a new tab, check out that lesson, and then come back. I'm gonna go ahead and continue on. I'm gonna go ahead and assume that you know exactly what I'm talking about, because this part right here is gonna be super important for your cross-examinations. Now, when it comes to your analogous question, keep in mind, it's going to have the same principles as your current case, because the reason why we have analogous questions and analogous facts during jury selection is because we can't talk about the case issues that are going to be presented to the eventual jury during jury selection. So we have to kind of use things that are very similar, but they're relevant because the principle is going to be the same. You can do the exact same thing during cross-examination. And so here's my recommendation. I want you to ask your leading questions on cross-examination to the witness and go through the logic of this analogous situation. And then at the end, what you're proving is that fundamental principle that you're ultimately applying to this case. And the witness, since the witness wasn't sitting in the courtroom during jury selection, has no idea what you're talking about. But the jury is going to absolutely know what you're talking about, because that's what they were answering earlier during jury selection. And so they know what you're getting at. And this is so important. And they're gonna be paying attention because the same fact pattern they are answering questions to is going to really raise their eyebrows and to where they're paying attention to the answers that they're hearing coming from the witness stand. I know all this seems super abstract, so let's make it more concrete by way of example. And to do that, let's go back to the jury selection chapter. And if you haven't watched that chapter, you need to go check it out. And in that chapter, what you'll see is the example involving the surveillance footage that I talked about. That was a potential bad fact that I was concerned about. And so I was able to ask questions to help figure out if the potential jury would get hung up on the fact that the surveillance footage in that case was wiped. Well, I was able to ask a series of questions, and that series of questions started with, okay, who has met someone super famous? Somebody raised their hand, told the story. Then I asked Mr. So-and-so, okay, do you believe Miss So-and-so? No relation, that she met that person super famous, I think it was Bono. And Mr. So-and-so said, yeah, I believe her. And I asked why. And then he explained, well, she seems like a credible person. She's under oath right now, yada, yada, yada. And then I asked the same series of questions to everyone, which ended up being the same people who were put in the jury box. And so everyone in the jury, if we fast forward to cross-examination, is going to remember that story of Bono. So I would structure my cross-examination with leading questions that basically outline this analogous series of facts to get the witness to help me prove the principle that applies to this case. I know that's super abstract. Again, more concrete. Let's say Mr. Smith is on the witness stand and opposing counsel is the one who called Mr. Smith up. So I may say in this situation involving the surveillance footage, okay, Mr. Smith, you're married, correct? He says yes. In that situation, I respond, okay, let's say, and I'll just give you a hypothetical situation, Mr. Smith. Let's say your wife met Bono. At that point in time, the jury, they're gonna know exactly what I'm talking about when they hear the name Bono. And she comes up to you and she tells you, I met Bono. You would believe her, correct? And he would most likely say yes, but if he says no, then you may have to pivot the story a little bit. Where it's like, okay, let's say your mom, let's say anyone you trust, let's say the most trustworthy person in your life says they met Bono. You're most likely going to eventually elicit a yes. So you may wanna kind of game plan in advance how you'd ensure you got that yes, but you'll eventually get there. The point is the buildup, right? We're trying to get to this ultimate principle. Now, as soon as he says yes, the next series of questions, again, leading questions are gonna be, it's because you trust your wife, correct? And after you've gotten that yes, either eventually or initially, hopefully initially, you would simply go through a series of leading questions that would be as simple as, and the reason why you would believe that your wife met Bono is because your wife's trustworthy, correct? He'd most likely say yes. And your wife is credible, correct? Yes. At that point in time, you basically proved your point. There's no need to go for the Scooby-Doo moment and to get him to admit that the surveillance footage in this case isn't needed in order to prove that the defendant's guilty. Instead, you've proved your point to the jury to where not everything has to have the video evidence, the photo evidence. Instead, you can rely and you can trust on credible people, AKA credible witnesses. And what you've done in that situation, you didn't come in guns blazing, but you took a more gentle approach that ultimately pinned the witness down to a fundamental principle that ties into what you were talking about during jury selection. See what we did there? We put it all together, put a bow on it, and now we're moving on. Fundamental number 6 is so simple, but people mess it up all the time. Be sure to listen to the answers that the witness is giving you. You don't want to be tuned in to maybe the next question you're thinking of asking. You don't want to be maybe looking down at your notes. You need to pay attention because that answer may end up indicating that you need to go down maybe a different path, pivot just a little bit in order to ultimately have the best cross-examination possible. So just pay attention, listen, be attentive. In doing so, a great tactic is to incorporate the answer into your next series of questions, and that way things seem much more seamless and smooth, and the cross-examination is much more enjoyable instead of it being real choppy to where you get an answer and then you end up not using that answer and it ends up sounding like a totally different question that maybe doesn't relate. In either event, be sure to incorporate that answer into your next question in order to have continuity. And this actually takes me to another benefit. If you're paying attention, you're also going to see the body language from the witness, and that can be a good sign of, okay, I think I'm touching on a pressure point, so let's start asking more questions about this topic. Number 7 is a concept I've already touched on. Do not argue with the witness ever. Instead, you're only asking questions and you're going to let the witness be their own worst enemy to where their answers are proving your points. If you're arguing, that means you're trying to get the witness to admit to something, and that's not what you should be doing. Focus on getting these facts proven in front of the jury. Don't try and focus too much on what's coming out of the witness's mouth. Number 8, I want you to accept that the Scooby-Doo moment is never going to happen. The sooner you do that, the sooner your crosses get so much better. And I know that seems counterintuitive. You would think that the upper echelon crosses all involve the Scooby-Doo moment occurring. In reality, those upper echelon crosses, they don't need the Scooby-Doo moment to be effective. That's what makes them so good. And that's how good I want your crosses to be. So accept the fact and then move on to the next one. Number 9, you need to control the witness on cross-examination. This is huge. And I'm pretty sure this is what most people are worried about when it comes to their cross-examinations, that they won't be able to pin down the witness to get certain responses, certain answers, or to even prove certain facts to the jury. The best way to really control the witness is through mainly 3 particular things. The first is pace, and this is so important and so critical for every cross-examination, because if you have the right pace and if you have the right changes of pace, that means you are controlling the witness. If you're able to ask a series of questions that are longer, ask a series of questions that are shorter, and you're able to really structure your questions to where it basically is keeping the jury awake at the same time, then that means you're having a super effective cross, because not only are you controlling the witness, but you're making sure that the jury's listening to the answers and ultimately, hopefully, either nuking the witness's testimony in its entirety or helping prove your client's case. The second way to control the witness is through logic, because there are going to be times where the witness is fair, the witness is credible, the witness is trustworthy, but they're basing their testimony in favor of the other side on an incomplete picture. And if you can use your cross-examination to complete that picture, then the witness goes through the series of logic and sees that there's a logical conclusion, may end up agreeing to that logical conclusion. In that situation, that's a home run. Check that box off, because the jury is going to be very compelled by that finding, by that agreement from the witness. But again, don't get too hung up on making sure that the witness admits to that fact. You're gonna have to use your judgment on how the witness is basically handling those series of questions to where, okay, yeah, the witness is most likely going to go ahead and agree. Or if you get the feeling that the witness is just completely not credible, completely biased, or for whatever reason, then the series of questions may not be effective enough by using logic, so you go ahead and move on to the third approach. The third way of controlling the witness during cross-examination is by using peer pressure. During cross-examination, if you're asking fair questions, then you're putting the witness in a position, basically at a crossroads, to either answer the question or to try and dodge the question altogether and to look bad in front of the jury. More often than not, people do not want to look bad in front of those that are judging them. And so they're typically in that situation, if it's a fair question, going to answer it directly. But there is a ton of stuff that goes into controlling the witness. Don't worry, we're gonna touch on this a bit more in future lessons. The number 10 principle is that you need to be a bit theatrical. What I mean by this is during your cross-examination, the lawyer is the star. In other words, you are the star in the center of attention, or at least that's how it should be. That's how an effective cross is. This means that if you want to emphasize that things are concerning, then you need to look concerned, you need to act concerned. If you're hearing an answer that is maybe not truthful, then you need to show the jury that, okay, pay attention because something's not up. And then so you're doing this with your eyebrows, you're maybe scratching something down or looking real confused at the answer. Whatever it is, you need to be able to tell more of a story than just what your questions are asking. Use a little bit of acting, use a little bit of flair, but don't be, overly dramatic to where you lose a bit of credibility at the same time. Again, it's a balancing act and you're just gonna have to use your judgment in the moment. Number 11, keep your cross as short and concise as possible. This is for a couple reasons. First, you don't want it to seem like at some point you're beating up on the witness. And second, you want to always maintain the jury's focus. If it goes on for too long, they'll start tuning you out, and that's not a good thing. Number 12, you need to end strong. What I mean by this is if you're using, let's say, the nuke approach and you're trying to nuke the entire testimony, at the end of your cross-examination needs to be the drop the mic moment or maybe literally. If you end up doing that, let me know in the comments down below. Or if you're trying to build up to a point that you're trying to ultimately prove to the jury, have the slow build up and then have that moment to where it leaves a lasting impression, to where you know everyone is focused at the end, to where that point is proven. Again, use the strategies that we talked about. Use the controlling of the witness, the pace, and the theatrics in order to gain the attention of everyone in the courtroom, and that way everyone knows exactly what you're trying to prove, and then your job is to ultimately prove it. Okay, so we're talking about ending strong, so we're trying to end strong here. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. As always, check out the description below as well. If you don't have any questions, comments, or concerns, you know the drill. I'll see you in the next lesson.